Hi and welcome to my channel. My name is Antje and today I'll be talking about Women, Race and Class by Angela Davis. And Angela Davis is a civil rights activist who you might know from the documentary on Netflix, The 13th, where she gave commentary on different issues, and they also showed clips of her in the 1970s. And I thought that she was a very interesting, articulate person, which is why I was interested in reading a book of hers. And Women, Race and Class is a collection of 13 essays which focus on the women liberation movement and how it was exclusionary towards women of color, in particular African American women. And the second thing the essays focus on is how African American women have always contributed quite a bit towards the US economy. And Angela Davis is a professor at a Californian university, so the academic quality of her essays are quite high, and what she does a lot is include sources for everything that she claims, which is something I really appreciate. I already mentioned that in my review for Invisible Women, because I just think it's good to know where she gets her information from and just to make sure that she isn't misquoting or misconstruing certain facts, and I think she does this quite well. What she also does, which I haven't really seen before, is that instead of paraphrasing statements made by other people, she actually quotes them directly, which makes sense in this book. As one thing she really focuses on is how the women's rights movement excluded African American women and what wordings they used or just how they justified it. So it really makes sense, and I think these direct quotes really lent a lot to this book, and it really heightened my reading enjoyment just seeing how different people were just treating the issue of women and the cross-section towards African American women. Before I go into my opinion of Women, Race and Class, I just want to mention the obvious. I am a white woman living in Europe in the 2020s, and Angela Davis is an African American woman, a political activist who wrote this book in the 1980s, so there's a huge difference between us, and I don't know whether Angela Davis really had someone like me who has no background in political activism in mind as an audience when she was writing this book, which is maybe why I didn't really like it that much. There were two main reasons why I didn't really vibe with this book. The first one being that communism was talked about a bit too positively in this book. Of course, capitalism has a huge part in why certain minorities are suppressed or why women are still suppressed until this day, and I am definitely not a fan of how capitalism has been working up until this day. But the communist glorification was a bit much, so I actually checked into Angela Davis's background, and in the past she has actually praised the politics or politicians of East Germany and the former Soviet Union. Both political systems were not good for the people living there and were actually quite oppressive, which just shows in her book. She doesn't mention these countries in any way, but you can just see how she sympathizes with communism a bit much, and that just had me feeling a bit iffy, and yeah, it just showed in the tone of the book, so that was not a great thing. The second actually bigger thing, and this is not a criticism of Angela Davis or of Women, Race and Class, is that I am of the opinion that when authors write a book, there are two factors that come to play. The first one is that there are authors who write their stories or their books or whatever because they have a certain audience in mind and they want to cater towards this audience. And then there's a second author group or a second factor that motivates author, and that is just wanting to share one's own stories, one's own opinion. And that is not a bad thing necessarily. These two motivators also intersect, but I really have a feeling that Angela Davis was writing this book just to get something off her chest and to make room for her emotions and her anger, which is absolutely understandable, but that also means that she is writing from a position of someone who is very well informed about women and women's rights and just the background of slavery and just African American history in general, and she doesn't bother to go back to the basics to kind of establish a ground. And for me, someone who is not well versed in American history, in particular American history concerning slavery or the suffragette movement, it was very difficult to keep up because Angela Davis was building her arguments at such a quick pace that I really couldn't keep up because there was just this basic knowledge that was missing from my side. So I am of the opinion that this book is catered more towards people who have studied in that area or who are activists in this area and just have this ground foundation that they can build on when they read Women, Race and Class. But this means that the book doesn't have a structure that is normal or what I am used to when I read a non-fiction that covers social issues. They follow a structure of always having an introductory part, then there's the main body and the takeaway message in the end, and the main body slowly builds up knowledge, or it just focuses on 2 or 3 main points to make sure that the reader knows what's going on. And then the take-home message just kind of summarizes everything up to leave you with the main statement. And Women, Race and Class doesn't do this. Instead, Angela Davis always touched on issues where I thought, oh, that sounds really interesting. But then she quickly moved on to the next point of her argument without me having understood completely what she was going on about, especially as she embeds everything that's going on in the historical context with the help of mentioning US presidents' names or famous lynchings, which I just didn't know about or would have had to Google to get a bigger understanding of, and I was just not ready to do that with a frequency that it would have taken for me to really understand what was going on. So instead of having finished this book and coming in theory out with a lot of knowledge on African American women's struggles over the last hundreds of years, I've actually closed this book and ended up with more questions or feelings of being overwhelmed than when I went in. And of course I took along a couple of points, but really not that many if you consider how much Angela Davis was trying to say. And of course you could say, oh well, then this book has functioned as a thought opener or just giving me food for thought to continue my studies. But that's not the feeling I was left with. Instead, I feel like I should just let the US be the US and focus on Europe and German politics and everything that's going on here, because I have a feeling that I just lack so much knowledge and it would take so much hard work to figure out all the small details that then fit together to the bigger picture and explain why the US has this problem with racism. I'm not saying that only the US has a problem with racism, but it's a different type of racism than we have here. And it just doesn't seem worth it because American politics actually does not have a lot to do with my life. So why should I invest all this work instead of focusing on stuff that's going on over here and all the issues we have here? And I do feel kind of bad that I feel this way because I really went into Women, Race and Class hoping to widen my horizon and to learn a lot and just get a bigger understanding for certain issues, and I just didn't. I am not saying that this book was badly written, badly researched, or that it covers the wrong issues, because I was just lacking the basic knowledge, so I can't say whether it is bad, but at the same time I also can't tell you whether it is a good book or not. In general, this was way over my head and it is difficult for me to kind of recommend it, but I read a couple of reviews on Storygraph and I think those reviews were mostly by people in the US and people who visit women's classes or just gender classes at universities, and they all really praised this book. So this might actually be a book that is great for Americans and Americans trying to be better allies, but it just has too little to do with my reality and my understanding of things. So yeah, that was my review of Women, Race and Class. Thank you for listening to this. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel, and I'll hopefully see you soon talking about a book that I actually did understand. Bye.